Hi, welcome back to my channel. This one's a bit of a long one. Basically, at the start of the year, I like to set myself a little bit of a reading list. Um, I don't do it every single year, but I do it most years. And one year, I think a couple of years ago, it would be now, because I love reading a classic golden age mystery. I kind of thought it would be fun to tackle the works of Agatha Christie. I'd read some of her stuff before, obviously, like probably a chunk of it, but I decided to just read everything she'd ever written, basically. She was a prolific writer and an interesting woman in her own right, and I just thought this would be a fun person to choose and to read all her stuff. While she obviously wrote detective stories, if you know anything about her. She also wrote some romances under the name Mary Westmacott, and she tried her hand at supernatural mysteries as well, which were very popular in her time period. But she also wrote some religious-themed things as well, and an autobiography. So I basically read everything she ever wrote. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And I realized that on this channel, I sort of mention her because I read I've talked about Golden Age mysteries on here and other authors who are contemporary to her. And so I just thought that it might make sense to kind of share what I thought about her different work and stuff as a kind of reference point. So that's what this video is. So just to give you a little background on Agatha Christie, I feel like in some ways, she's so well known that some of it goes without saying. But to give her a little bit of context, Agatha Christie was born in 1890 in Torquay, which is in Devon in the UK. She was the youngest of three to a middle or upper class family, and she was generally a shy child and found it hard to speak up for herself and sometimes felt misunderstood. Because of this aspect of her nature, her mother chose to have her educated at home rather than at school, which was not unusual for the time at all, especially for girls. And her mother encouraged her reading and writing, though not at as young an age as children are currently taught to read, which I found really interesting. The relationship between the family seems to have been quite warm, very close family, but young Agatha often felt that her mother was the person who truly understood her and helped her articulate things that she felt, or kind of stepped in and helped her voice be heard. Because of this, the two remained very close their whole lives, probably especially because of Agatha not having other playmates her age, the way that a child today or a child in school might, for example. I really love how Agatha Christie describes this relationship in her biography. It's so genuine and warm. I think on this channel, for different reasons, we talk a lot about the mother relationship in novels being written as quite complex, which makes sense for a novel. Or if you watched my VC Andrews video that I did, we sort of talked about toxic and controlling or overbearing mothers in that video for obvious reasons. I just think that makes the real healthy mother-child relationships like this, you kind of realize how precious that is. And so that's an important aspect of her life. Christie had some small interest in writing when she was younger, but she did not set out to be a writer initially. In 1917, during a conversation about mystery stories and their quality, her sister Madge challenged her to write a decent mystery story and bet that she couldn't write a good one, which is kind of funny. Christie took that bet, and the rest is history. At this time, she was actually working in a dispensary, and this background knowledge of sort of chemistry and medicines, that kind of thing, helped her find poisons and things like that for her stories. Her first published novel was The Mysterious Affair at Styles in 1920, introducing her famous detective Hercule Poirot. From there, she went on to write over 70 novels and more short story collections, both under her own name and as Mary Westmacott, which I mentioned before. Some of her books were standalone. Many of them featured recurring characters like Miss Marple, who first appeared in 1930, and Tommy and Tuppence, but also less well-remembered ones like Superintendent Battle, Mr. Quinn, and Parker Pym. Her books have been so popular that she was dubbed the Queen of Crime, and many mystery novels have referenced her works or taken inspiration from them. Her books are some of the best-selling of all time, outsold only by the Bible and Shakespeare. She was a founding member of the Detection Club in 1930 as well, and is a key writer of the golden age of mystery or detective writing. In her personal life, Agatha Christie was married twice. Her first marriage was to Colonel Archibald Christie in 1914, and they had one child together, a daughter called Rosalind. In her biography, she displays no bitterness towards him, but personally, I don't like him. His picture shows a fairly handsome and dashing-looking man, and Agatha was a little bit younger than him and quite shy, so he seems like very charming. He's described as very unempathetic in general, and he had little patience for Agatha Christie's sort of feelings and things like that. Agatha Christie's mother did not like him and did not she didn't stop them from getting married or anything, but she sort of was like, are you sure this is a good idea? When Agatha Christie's mother died, he seemed to get annoyed at her being sad and having feelings and not just kind of being all about him or even needing something from him and not just providing something. And he embarked on an affair with a 24-year-old secretary, leaving Agatha Christie alone to deal with the loss of the one person who truly understood her. She felt demoralized by the end of the marriage, which would have been much more of a social disgrace in the 1920s than today. And she felt deeply alone after the death of her mother. And she seemed to feel a lot of despair and depression, which I think is perfectly understandable. At this time, feeling that no one would care, she got in her car and desperately just disappeared in 1926. And she was found 11 days later. So this created a huge sensation in the news, and I always feel terrible for her about this, knowing that she was a shy person and was just going through something. So she was facing a truly dark phase in her life, and it was a time, when mental health wasn't talked about, wasn't understood. She didn't really have someone. She'd always had her mother that she could turn to, and that person was gone. So it was just, I can't even imagine how alone she must have felt. So this event was hugely sensationalized in the press. They had a field day with it at the time. And even today, it's sort of talked about in this mysterious, what happened kind of a way. And it's funny because I always feel a little bit defensive for her when this comes up because I just think it's a bit stupid. Just in my opinion, based on her book, Unfinished Portrait in 1934, I think it's pretty clear that she was considering committing suicide. And she went to a hotel or went away somewhere to do this kind of anonymously, but was stopped by a stranger who just recognized the signs and talked to her. That's not an uncommon story, honestly, but it doesn't make for a lot of drama. And that's what happens in that book that I just mentioned, Unfinished Portrait, which she wrote under a pseudonym. So honestly, I think it's just that doesn't make for a dramatic story. So this kind of silly mystery thing has grown up around events. And I think, afterwards, she just wanted to forget that it had happened and people wouldn't let her forget that she'd done that. And I just think that's really just kind of sad, Anyway, as I was saying, the media jumped on the whole thing. As a private citizen, she could have just gone home at the end of all that. But because she was Agatha Christie, the famous novelist, all eyes were on her. Everyone was talking about her. There was a lot of speculation that it might have been a stunt to get attention, which is very not her character at all. And it would have just been mortifying. Anyway, the divorce went ahead in 1928. So that's sort of that end of that chapter of her life. But happily, not that long after, she met a man called Max Mallowan, who was a little bit younger than her, and he proposed to her, which was came as a surprise to her. She, I guess, sort of felt that part of her life was over, the romantic part of her life. And he was a little bit younger, so she wasn't sure if he was serious kind of thing. So Eventually, he seemed to just convince her that he meant it, I guess, and they married in 1930, and they basically lived happily ever after. And I just think that's really lovely. He was an archaeologist, and she went on several expeditions with him, about which she wrote a memoir, and that also influenced some of her novels, some of the, locations and different things like that. And he seems to have been a very sort of funny, not like playfully absent-minded professor kind of guy, and he made her very happy, and I just think that's really nice. It's nice to have a happy ending to a story. Agatha Christie wrote books for her whole life. Her books were obviously hugely successful. She's often the standard that other mystery novels are held to or compared to, and the intricate plots, twists, and the depth of her characters meant they remain favorites to this day. Her play, The Mousetrap, is the world's longest running, having premiered in 1952. And it's, I think it's still running in London's West End. And she's been translated into many languages. She's read all over the world. She was made a dame by Queen Elizabeth II in 1971. And her contributions to literature and writing up until her death, she was writing right up until her death in 1976. So I think her last novel was actually published posthumously. That word, every time it comes up, for some reason, I just can't pronounce it very well. So let's start with Hercule Poirot. He's, I was going to say he's a favorite of mine, but then when I was like, but then so is Miss Marple, and so are a lot of these books. He is the famous Belgian detective with the fine moustache, and he was inspired by refugees from the war that were coming to England from Belgium. So Agatha Christie came into contact with some of those people and was kind of inspired by them. And he's often joined by his friend Hastings. So it's a little bit of background for you there. Poirot is quite fastidious in his habits. So some of the humor of these books comes from him sort of being a bit annoyed by the English way of doing things, or by people being a little bit less than perfect in their personal habits. So the first book is The Mysterious Affair at Styles from 1920. This one has some great plot twists and double crosses. It's Agatha Christie's first novel, and the first novel featuring Poirot, it's very witty and sharp. And it was a sign of great things to come, obviously. It follows the classic form of a wealthy home or an estate with an aging matriarch whose death seems inevitable when she's surrounded by her scheming relatives and hangers-on. The home featured, Styles Court, would actually also be the site of his final case, written years later. This is one that I do really like. I think it's really good. It's funny sort of seeing that now because it reminds me of Patricia Wentworth. A lot of her setups were very much like this, even though her style was her own. And then we have Murder on the Links in 1923. Poirot and Hastings set off to northern France, following a mysterious letter asking for help. On arrival, they find the author of the letter has been found murdered, his body left in a shallow grave on a new golf course. Intrigue follows as a beautiful neighbor was either the man's lover or perhaps blackmailing him. Plenty of twists, a great foil for Poirot in the form of an arrogant Paris detective, and Hastings falling in love and doing some very foolish things. That one's quite entertaining. Then in 1926, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. This is one of the ones I really liked. So I enjoyed all of these. Some of them I liked, some of them I really liked. So this one is about a wealthy widow committing suicide after being blackmailed. Her fiancé, Roger Ackroyd, gets a letter from her and retires to his study to read it. But later that night, he's found murdered, and the letter and his dissipated stepson are missing. A Dr. Shepard narrates this story as Hastings has gone to Argentina with his new wife, and Poirot just happens to be his next-door neighbor who is retired to grow marrows. The gossipy sister of the doctor is good fun, and the doctor is a little less thick than Hastings. Hastings can sometimes be a little bit too stupid. And this one has quite a nice twist in the ending, so that one is, I recommend that one. 1927 brought us The Big Four. Poirot takes on a case of international criminal masterminds when a man who approaches him for help suddenly dies. Are the big four behind it, the criminal organization? And can he stop them from their evil plans for world domination? So this one felt a little bit more like a comic book to me, a little bit sort of cheesy with some truly far-fetched twists, but it's still good. It's still fun. The Mystery of the Blue Train in 1928. When a millionaire's daughter heads to the Riviera with a famous and much desired ruby in her luggage, she takes the blue train and winds up murdered. Was she killed for her priceless ruby or by her desperate husband, his lover, her lover? It's quite a lot of people there. Poirot investigates with the help of Catherine Gray, a recent heiress, or recently made heiress. I liked the exotic location, the money-grabbing relatives and lovers, and a side character, Lennox, who has loads of personality. It's a nice winding read with that sort of international glamorous flavor that Agatha Christie does so well. Peril at End House in 1932. This is one that I liked. On a relaxing trip to Cornwall, Poirot and Hastings stumble upon an attempted murder. Beautiful Nick Buckley refuses at first to believe someone could want her dead, because even though she inherited End House, she has no money and is in debt. Can Poirot figure out who and why before it's too late? I love the way that Christie evokes the devil may care, flippant sort of attitude of the 1930s kind of era, the smart set of that time in this book. I also think that it has some lovely twists in it. I always love a love story as well that has an interesting house with secrets. Like, this is very up my alley kind of thing. 1933 brought us Lord Edgware Dies. This is one that I like. An actress asks Poirot to help her get a divorce from her husband, Lord Edgware, who is a sinister and strange man. We always love that in a book. Poirot agrees to help, but soon Lord Edgware and another actress are found dead on the same night. Ambition, secrets, and a woman in two places on one night all play a part. This is a fun one. I liked the way that the world of characters and upper classes intersected, though this is one of the rare ones where I guess the killer pretty early on. It doesn't happen for me that much with Agatha Christie, which is probably one of the reasons she's so much fun. 1934 brought us Murder on the Orient Express. This is a really famous one. Called back to London unexpectedly, Poirot finds himself on the Orient Express when a man is stabbed to death. Tasked with looking into the case while the train is stuck in a snowdrift, Poirot soon finds that the dead man was actually connected with a tragic child kidnapping and murder case. There are many who would want this man dead, but the killer must be someone on the train. This is one of Christie's most famous, and it's a very good book with some great misdirects. I think for me, this one, I felt like the surprise ending is a little bit far-fetched. Like, it's kind of satisfying. It works, but I think that one, for me, is just good. Not like favorite or anything. So, 3-act tragedy, 1935. Famous actor Sir Charles Cartwright hosts a dinner party at his home where a Mr. Satterthwaite, who is more often found in his native habitat of the Harley Quinn stories, which we will talk about later, Hercule Poirot and other guests join him. When the vicar suddenly dies, it's at first dismissed as unsuspicious, but the second act begins when the guests are gathered together again, and this time a doctor dies under the same circumstances. Breaking the book into 3 acts is a fun way to play up the theatricality of the book and the characters who make their money on the stage, so it kind of has like a theme, which is pretty cool. There's a few fun, dramatic foreshadowing moments, and the mystery is a fun misdirect that Agatha Christie was, really good at. Death in the Clouds, 1935. This is also sometimes titled Death in the Air. So this is one of those cases where sometimes the UK and US editions might have a different title. So just to try and help you find the, the books you're looking for down the line. So Poirot is on a flight home from Paris when one of the passengers is found dead. Each of the other passengers has their own secret and like a link to the deceased. And the clues of the wasp and the poisoned dart point to the Belgian detective himself. So this is fun. Good location for a mystery. It would have been very exciting in the 30s, where air travel was kind of, or even international travel was starting to become more of a thing. Yeah, I really like how the 30s era travel scene is explored in this one, and themes of the way that murder impacts witnesses' lives in random ways is really interesting, for better or worse. Like this one, didn't guess the killer at all. Then we have the ABC Murders in 36. This one has a serial killer who writes Poirot a note and starts killing based on letters of the alphabet. Hastings is back as Poirot's naive sidekick, and there's a fun twist in the end. I felt like the book got a little dull in the middle, but it's a classic, just not personal favorite. 1936, Murder in Mesopotamia. A nurse joins an archaeological dig to attend to a woman who is deathly afraid her first husband is still alive and wants revenge. No one believes it could be true until she's found dead, and one of the team on the site must have done it. Influenced by Christie's own experience on her husband's dig, the ending has been widely criticized as being unrealistic. Personally, I think that's all part of the fun. I like the way that the sense of uneasiness and doom really builds over those first several chapters as well. Cards on the Table, 1936. I really like this one, or I like this one. Hercule Poirot is joined by Christie characters Ariadne Oliver, Colonel Race, and Superintendent Battle at a bridge game. So these are all recurring characters. Ariadne Oliver is quite famous, actually. She's sort of like, she's an author of mystery novels, and she's sort of like a playful Agatha Christie self-insert, or maybe even like a Agatha Christie kind of sending up herself a little bit in a really fun way. But anyway, it's a bridge game. It's 4 detectives against 4 suspects, and the game is on once the host is murdered. So this is one of Christie's highly regarded entries, and it's a fun way of, it's really playful. It's just sort of misdirecting you, and then the ending is really satisfying. Dumb Witness in 1937. It's called Poirot Loses a Client in North America, this one. When Poirot receives a letter from an elderly woman asking for help and finds that she's been dead for 2 months, he decides to investigate. The wealthy woman has left her money unexpectedly to her companion rather than her 3 grasping relatives who expected to inherit, and Poirot immediately suspects foul play. Dumb Witness. The dumb witness of the title is the victim's dog, and he makes a lovely thread throughout the narrative. Dumb in this context obviously means mute or unable to talk, as opposed to like stupid. Just for context there, that's what that word meant at the time. This one's apparently considered one of Christie's less masterful works, but I think it's a highly entertaining read, personally. I could be a bit sold by the dog in it, though. I'm partial to animals in stories like this. Death on the Nile in 1937. Lynette is the richest woman in England and has everything, including a wedding ring from a man who is engaged to her now ex-best friend, Jackie. While on honeymoon in Egypt, Jackie turns up and follows the newlyweds everywhere, loudly proclaiming her hurt and intention to get even. But when Lynette is murdered, Jackie has an alibi. The exotic location is fun, and Christie's skewering eye for social types is fun too. So I really like this one. I kind of guessed what was going on pretty early, but that didn't kind of spoil it for me. Appointment with Death in 1938. In Jerusalem, Poirot overhears a voice say, "You do see, don't you, that she's got to be killed." The voice turns out to belong to a member of the Boynton family, whose stepmother is a sadistic, emotional tyrant. When that stepmother turns up dead, Poirot proposes that not only was it murder, but that he can solve the case in 24 hours. This one I felt was a little slow in parts, but I think the location is used really well and makes it a bit interesting. And I feel like the murderer was somebody that I wouldn't have guessed, or I didn't guess. So Hercule Poirot's Christmas from 1938, also known as Murder for Christmas. Simeon Lee invites all his adult children home for the holiday and seems determined to stir up trouble and old arguments between them. But when he is brutally murdered, Poirot steps in to help solve the crime. So this one is a locked room mystery with a neat twist ending. And it's just kind of classic, masterful Christie sort of stuff. 1, 2, Buckle My Shoe from 1940. Poirot goes to the dentist. Later that day, the dentist is murdered. The murderer could be any of a number of people, a known communist, a leftist, or it may be part of a larger plot to assassinate a wealthy conservative called Blunt. A very political murder case, which reflected some of the concerns of the time. I don't know, that kind of makes it not that much fun to read. It's not bad. I don't think there's any Agatha Christie books that I think are bad, in fairness. But it's just not as much fun. This one I like, Sad Cypress from 1940, largely set in a courtroom, which makes it feel a little different to other Christie novels. This novel opens with Eleanor Carlyle accused of murder. She appears unable to defend herself as all the clues point to her. Following her wealthy aunt's death, Eleanor stands to inherit a large sum, but she has lost the love of her fiancé, who fell in love with a young protege of their aunt's. And then that protege wound up dead. So it's a swift, winding mystery and leaves plenty of clues and red herrings. Very enjoyable. Then we have Evil Under the Sun in 1941. Poirot is taking a seaside holiday in Devon when a beautiful and flirtatious woman is found dead. She had many enemies on the island where the hotel is, from her own stepdaughter to the wife of her paramour, but who killed her? I had some sense of who the killer was, but the full reasons of why and how were not what I thought. So this is a good one. Evil Under the Sun. I like this one. Five Little Pigs from 1942. This is another one I really liked. I feel like around this time, we're sort of in the 40s. She really knew what she was doing as an author at this point. There's quite a few where I'm like, I like this one. I like this one. So this is Five Little Pigs from 1942, called Murder in Retrospect as well. Poirot is approached by a young woman who has found out that her mother was convicted of murdering her father 16 years before. Wanting to understand what happened and absolutely sure her mother is innocent, she asks the Belgian detective for help. There's a good murder plot here, but the first part feels slightly rushed, and parts of the middle involve characters retelling the events in their own words. So that can be a little, you might find that a little tedious. I would say maybe this isn't Christie's best work, but I actually just really liked this one. Then we have The Hollow in 46. This is another one that I like. The Hollow is a beautiful country estate where the Anquetel clan live and gather, but alliances are uneasy between cousins, wives, and lovers. When Poirot is invited to lunch while the house is full of guests, he arrives to find someone dying by the pool and a variety of suspects arrayed in a tableau. Is this crime what it appears to be? A good winding mystery with focus more on the other characters than the detective, which is kind of a nice twist. I really liked the vividly drawn Lady Anquetel, who often made me laugh. Good drama, good mystery. Taken at the Flood, 1948. This is another one on my like list. When Gordon Claude is killed in an air raid in the London Blitz, his young wife of a few weeks is left with his fortune. When Poirot is visited by a relative of the dead man, saying that spirits told her that the young widow's first husband is still alive, he wonders at her motive till a notice in the paper makes him decide to get involved. This is a good one. I thought I sort of knew who the killer was once or twice, and then I was just really delighted to be wrong. Mrs. McGinty's Dead, 1952. When Mrs. McGinty is murdered, her lodger is charged and it seems like an open and shut case. But the police call on Poirot because they feel like it was all too easy. Can he find out who killed her and why? I liked the reference in this one to well-known crime cases that mirrored some true crime that I've read about. It was I found that really interesting. Nice misdirects, nice plot twists. Poirot's in good form here. His need for order and perfectionism is sort of made fun of here in a fun way. 1953, After the Funeral. So this is kind of in my favorites list. So really liked this one. At Richard Lasquenet's funeral, his sister remarks that she believes he was murdered. Everyone is shocked until the next day her body is found brutally murdered in her home. Hercule Poirot Investigates. Yeah, I really like this one. Classic mystery, interesting twists, hard to guess ending. It's just a good setup that it just works really well. Hickory Dickory Dock, 1955. Poirot's secretary, Miss Lemon, asks for his help after a series of odd thefts take place at the lodgings of some students, which is a house managed by her sister. While some of the thefts are easily explained, Poirot warns that soon there will be a worse crime, and he's proved right when a student is found dead. Miss Lemon's first appearance in a novel, she previously had only appeared in short stories, and it's just an interesting, entertaining story. It's fine. Miss Lemon is kind of interesting. She appears in a few different Agatha Christie. She's not just in Poirot, but she has this obsession with the perfect filing system. So she's kind of this fun character. I really like it when she turns up in things. Dead Man's Folly, 56. Ariadne Oliver gets a bad vibe when she's hired to appear at a country fete, and she calls her pal Poirot. When a 14-year-old girl is killed and the lady of the house goes missing, Poirot is on the case. Quite like this one. I like the ones set in English houses. I think I've kind of mentioned that in other videos as well. For some reason, I just enjoy that. Yeah, I guess this one, in a sense, this one's kind of formulaic. But Ariadne is always fun, so it works. Cat Amongst the Pigeons in 59. During a rebellion in the Middle East, diamonds are smuggled out of the country, and some people are very eager to get their hands on them, suspecting they might be hidden at a well-known girls' school where two pupils have links to the deposed ruler. Poirot comes in the last third, and yeah, the descriptions of the school and its inhabitants are sort of quite funny. It's not bad. The Clocks in 63. A typist is requested at a private home, but when she arrives and lets herself in, she finds a room full of clocks and a dead body. That's such a great setup. And the blind occupant of the house never called the secretarial agency. Poirot appears a little bit later in this novel and solves the crime from his armchair, while the plot is divided partly into murder mystery and part espionage plot. Yeah, great setup, but not the best payoff. Third Girl, 1966. Poirot and Ariadne Oliver investigate, and unlike some later tales, the detective is present for the whole novel this time. A girl comes to Poirot telling him she thinks that she murdered someone, then promptly leaves, assuming he can't help. She is the third girl sharing a flat with two others, and the mystery seems to involve them all. But has anyone been murdered? Christie amusingly has her take on young people in the 60s with their miniskirts and men with brocade waistcoats. So that's kind of a fun aspect of that one. Halloween Party in 69. Ariadne Oliver is at a children's Halloween party when a child says she was once witness to a murder. The girl's story is easily dismissed until she's found drowned later that night at the party. So this is kind of a fun one. It lacks a little bit of the charm of earlier books. It's interesting that everyone in the book feels that the killer must be a stranger, a maniac, someone on drugs. I'm not sure if this was sort of meant as a misdirect or really just a comment on how Christie felt about people's attitudes in the 60s, because she would have really seen a lot of change by 1969 in sort of different attitudes and things. So that's an interesting one. And of course, a child being murdered is pretty dark. Elephants Can Remember from 1972. This one is on my definitely liked list. Ariadne Oliver and Poirot team up to solve a cold case of a double suicide of a seemingly happy couple that occurred years ago. The child of the relationship is now grown, and the case relies heavily on people's memory. This one's actually Christie's last Poirot. As Curtain, though published last, was actually written in 1940. So Curtain, 1975, Poirot's last case. In this book, he's very old now and tasks Hastings with helping him solve one last case, heading back to Styles where it all began and trying to find the mysterious person who is a deadly link between many cases that all seem unrelated. Yeah, this was kind of cool because she wrote it and then she wrote this ending for Poirot, but wrote it earlier and kind of put it away. And I think that's kind of cool. It makes it interesting. But it's hard to read a story about a character that you like so much. Facing their last case. And it was a very sad book for me. And then finally on this list, we have the Monogram Murders in 2014. So as you can see, this one came out in 2014, years after Christie's death. So what is the deal with that? This one's actually a book by Sophie Hannah, who was commissioned by Agatha's estate to write this book starring Poirot, set in the late 20s. So chronologically, it sits just after The Mystery of the Blue Train. So yeah, that one, if you're looking at Christie novels, this one might come up, but it's not written by Christie herself. So I'm just not going to review it. I haven't read it. I'm not really interested in that kind of thing. So then we have Poirot's short stories. So first up is the book Poirot Investigates from 1924. So this is a book of classic cases featuring kidnapped prime ministers, Egyptian curses, and the one case that stumped the young Poirot. I like these because the characters are still fresh, though I like all of the Poirot stories. Sometimes Hastings is written just a little bit too stupid and Poirot a little too arrogant. This is Golden Age Poirot, and the cases are varied and interesting. And the US version of this book had 3 extra stories than the UK one did, but modern editions include these. So if yours is an older copy and doesn't have those 3, you will find those 3 in the book Poirot's Early Cases. So if you're somebody who wants to read everything, there's a little tip for you. Murder in the Mews, 1937. These are 4 longer form short stories or maybe novellas featuring Poirot, Murder in the Mews, The Incredible Theft, Dead Man's Mirror, and Triangle at Rhodes. These are all good stories. The longer format is nice. Sometimes short stories can be a bit, it's nice to have that longer space to kind of develop things a bit more. They do feel a little bit like reworkings of other plots. And then we have in 1947, The Labors of Hercules. This is a classic, and this is one I love to reread. So Poirot sets out to complete 12 cases that correspond to the mythical labors of the Greek hero he's named after. As a swan song before he retires to grow vegetable marrows. I love that he's so good at being a detective, but part of him just wants to move to the country and grow marrows. And I love that because marrows are not even an exciting vegetable. Not that there are many exciting vegetables, but I don't know. There's just something about that feels very human. I really like the concept of this book and the clever ways, the cases kind of mimic the labors of Hercules. The mysteries are not all murders, and so, I don't know, there's some fun twists and stuff in this one. It's a very entertaining book. And then 1974, Poirot's Early Cases. This book contains some really great cases from what seems to be different times in Poirot's career, published in magazines and in the US, but perhaps not all before collected in one volume. So these were not written in the 70s as far as I can tell, but these contain some really good cases. Hastings and Inspector Japp make appearances in some, but not all of these. I feel like this collection contains some of the most tightly written and least comical of Poirot's cases. Even though you will find some of them printed in other books too, it just makes this is a good volume of short stories. So this one is on my very much liked list. So next up we have the Miss Marple books. Miss Marple is much imitated. I think she's been a huge influence on subsequent mystery stories. And she sort of has a, what would you call it? Spiritual sister in the Miss Silver mysteries, for example, which would have been sort of contemporary to her. She is a woman, an older woman who lives in a small village called St. Mary Meads. And because of her observation of the people around her and just her sharpness, she often solves cases just by understanding human nature more than clues and things. So she has this wonderful way of being a little bit enigmatic, and she's often kind of overlooked because she's an older woman in that era. She just sits quietly, sort of, knitting or whatever. And she's brilliant. She's one of my favorite detective characters in fiction. So in 1930, we have the murder at the vicarage. St. Mary Mead's vicar finds a local man shot dead in his study, a man who many have wished dead. This mystery throws suspicion on everyone in turn in a way that's pure Agatha magic. Here we meet Miss Marple for the first time, and we see some of the things that will become a staple of her stories. People dismissing her as a little old biddy, her hinting she knows things but not telling the narrator of the story till the end, and also her taking a back seat in the story but also solving it all on her own by the end of the book. It's great stuff, and I think the Marple stories get stronger as Christie wrote more of them. So that was 1930. 1942, The Body in the Library. This one is in my favorites list. I love this book. Christie liked the idea of the classic mystery trope of the body in the library, and she decided to try to do something novel and creative with it. This story opens with Miss Bantry being woken by a maid to hear there's a murdered woman in their library, and the mystery is that they have no idea who this person is. So classic Christie, and it's Miss Marple at her best. Then we have The Moving Finger in 1942. When a man moves to a small village to recover from a flying accident, he takes his sister with him and expects all to be quiet and dull, but poison pen letters set off a chain of events that lead to death. A nicely paced mystery with some fun characters and a snapshot of village life. But sadly, Miss Marple only appears to wrap things up and save the day. So personally, I could have used more of her in this novel, but it's a good read anyway, as a mystery in its own right. A murder is announced in 1950. An ad in the paper announces that a murder will take place at a local home, and while curious neighbors gather, the inhabitants do not know who placed the ad. And then the lights go out. Shots are fired, and a stranger lies dead. But is he really a stranger? And is everyone who they say they are? Miss Marple Investigates, and while this is one of the few where I did manage to guess the ending, I really enjoyed the twists along the way and Christie's ability to lampoon British character types and prejudices. They do it with Mirrors, 1952. Miss Marple is called on to stay with an old childhood friend when something is not right at her large estate, where she and her husband help troubled youths. When a murder occurs, is it one of the teenagers, or is the real killer using smoke and mirrors to hide himself in plain sight? This one, it's a fun mystery. Somehow this one seemed to lack urgency for me, but there's a misdirect in this book that's quite nicely done. A Pocket Full of Rye, 1953. Christie based a few novels on the theme of nursery rhymes, and this is one of them. A shady businessman is poisoned in his office, and the mystery centers around his home and family, where a maid works who was trained by Miss Marple originally, so she gets involved. I wanted the killer to be a character, one of the characters that kind of irritated me, but it wasn't that person, and ain't that just like life sometimes? 450 from Paddington, 1957. This one is also called What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. So you might find that title. This book is about an older woman who sees a murder from her train window. When no one believes her and no body is found, she enlists her friend Miss Marple to help her out. Teamed up with the remarkable Lucy Islesbarrow, the plot thickens nicely and the case takes some interesting turns. Personally, I would have liked a little bit more time spent with Marple on this case, but it's a very entertaining read. The Mirror Cracked, 1962. A film star with a past moves to St. Mary Mead, and a death occurs at her first gathering at her home, Gossington Hall, where the body in the library previously took place, just for interest's sake there. I love that this book is dedicated to Margaret Rutherford, who played Miss Marple in some of the movie adaptations, and also that Marina Gregg is based on Jean Tierney and her sad story, which is well worth looking up if you are interested. I like the way that Christie also explores sort of aging and the changing times. The more things change, the more they stay the same, that kind of thing. This one's a little bit slower than some of her other books. A Caribbean Mystery in 1964. Miss Marple is sent on a Caribbean vacation by her nephew and is told by a man in her resort that he has a photo of a murderer. When that man is found dead, Marple and another guest, the irascible Mr. Raphael, embark on finding the killer. It's quite a nice plot, interesting location, which is fun. Just a solid Christie mystery. At Bertram's Hotel in 1965, Miss Marple stays at a hotel in London, but something about how authentic it is strikes her as odd. Meanwhile, Scotland Yard investigates a series of train robberies. An addle-headed clergyman goes missing, and a young woman wonders if someone is trying to kill her. So there's a lot of elements there. Sometimes I feel like Miss Marple is too often not the main character in novels where she should be. This one has some nice misdirects and things, but it seems to kind of waffle a little bit. And it's not really a classic murder mystery format, so there's that. Nemesis, 1971. Mr. Raphael from the Caribbean Mystery leaves Miss Marple a bequest. If she can solve a mystery, she gets a sum of money, but there's no clue as to what the mystery is. An intriguing way to start a mystery novel. I feel that this one takes a long time to get going. Gets a little sort of flabby around the middle and a bit dull. And the end didn't pay off with a super satisfactory ending, but it's still enjoyable. It's still Christie. And then we have Sleeping Murder in 1976. I like this one. This is Miss Marple's last case. When Gwenda is tasked with finding a home for her and her husband, she's delighted by a house she finds, but on moving in, she finds strange memories surface, including an awful terror when she climbs the stairs. Is she going mad, or is there some mystery in the house? So this one's really interesting with its theme of sort of old murders, childhood memories. It's got an interesting sort of exploration of psychology to it. Though Gwenda is the main focus more than Miss Marple, and sometimes I don't like that. On the whole, this has just a good plot, so I really like this one. And then we have Miss Marple short stories. So The 13 Problems from 1932. This one is on my liked list. This is called The Tuesday Club Murders in North America. A group of 6 disparate people gather and decide to each tell a tale of an interesting case that has baffled them. One of the 6 is Miss Marple. The cases all have a nice puzzle to them, and each storyteller has a unique voice, so that's really fun. It's a nice variation on a way to tell 6 short mysteries with a kind of unifying outer narrative. Miss Marple's Final Cases in 1979. So this one was published after the author's death, and it contains 6 Miss Marple stories and then 2 supernatural stories. This was published in the UK only because these had already appeared in other US volumes. And the stories are not from late in Marple's career, but sort of from the middle. The stories are entertaining enough, but not amazing stories. And the spooky ones are only okay. So there's that. So then we have the Tommy and Tuppence books. These kind of have a special place in my heart amongst these volumes because I remember watching old BBC, probably from like the 70s or 80s versions of these stories made into movies from that time period. And I mean, I'm sure if I watched them now, I'd probably find them cozy, but not spectacular. But yeah, I just have such lovely memories of watching these with my family. So yeah, so Tommy and Tuppence, the first book is from 1922 and it's called The Secret Adversary. And this is a favorite of mine. The first book about the 2 young adventurers, Tommy and Tuppence, 2 friends who've known each other since childhood and find themselves struggling to make ends meet after the war. That would be the First World War, by the way. 1922 is the year of this book. They decide to advertise themselves as a sort of detectives, and they fall into a case where they must find a mysterious Jane Finn and a missing document before it falls into the wrong hands. So this book is great. I really like these 2. And this book has a real jazz age, upbeat, sort of fun attitude to it. It's a good one. In 1941, we had N or M. Tommy and Tuppence are now a little bit older, and feel a bit useless, so they jump at the chance to go undercover and look for spies when there is a mole in MI5. This one is fun. You could probably guess where it's going and who is secretly a Nazi in this story. Perhaps the best bit is that Christie accidentally named a character after someone who was actually in MI5, and then she was investigated by them herself. It's so funny. By the Pricking of My Thumbs from 1968. This is a top favorite of mine, a swift and adventurous story. This one sees Tuppence get involved in the disappearance of an elderly woman and finds that there's more than she bargained for. This one has a dark, mysterious house, secret passageways, a woman who looks like a witch, and also has a serial killer. It is dark, but it is tempered with Tommy and Tuppence's delightful natures and their relationship. So I like the way this book explored aging, and that is something really cool about Tommy and Tuppence, is that because the books are sort of written far apart, you get these different ages in their life where these things are happening, different eras of life. Postern of Fate in 73, Tommy and Tuppence have retired and bought an old house in a small town when they find a mysterious coded note in a child's book. It seems that there was once a murder in the house, and the two find themselves irresistibly drawn to find out what really happened, even though they're meant to be retired. It's a good plot. It seems to end a little abruptly, and there are several references to the N or M mystery, which is fine, but that kind of felt a little bit repetitive to me sometimes. And then there is Tommy and Tuppence short stories. So Partners in Crime from 1929. This is one of the ones I like. Tommy and Tuppence are bright young things, newlywed, when the Secret Service puts them in charge of a detective agency. Since they're playing at detective, they pretend to be Mr. Blunt and his secretary, the original proprietor of the premises, and also apply the personality and methods of various literary detectives to each case. So it's a fun little conceit that they've got going there, especially when they try out Poirot's methods for size. So she's kind of Christie making fun of herself a little bit there. So this one's often very funny, and it's maybe some of their books or stories are maybe a little bit far-fetched, but in a fun way. It's kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek, so. Okay, and then lastly, in that kind of, what would you call it, non-standalone or a series of books around a character, we have Superintendent Battle. So Secret of Chimneys in 1925 is the first book with him in it. Here we meet Superintendent Battle and Lady Brent, aka Bundle, for the first time. Her nickname is Bundle. It was the 20s. People had funny nicknames. This is more a thriller than a mystery, though there is a murder. This one involves an international plot resulting in a treasure hunt-like search for a diamond in a big old house. It's fun. It's maybe a little bit more out there, but it's got a very good 1920s vibe, which is really good. Seven Dials mystery in 29. A group of friends leave a bunch of alarm clocks to wake a friend as a joke because he always sleeps in, but he never wakes at all. Is he linked to the mysterious Seven Dials? This is not considered one of Christie's best books. She doesn't shine as a thriller writer, in my opinion, but it's a fun little escape with plenty of wry humor, even if the plot is a little bit silly. Cards on the Table in 1936. Superintendent Battle appears in this one, but we already talked about that on Poirot's list. Murder is Easy, 1939. I like this one. Young Luke meets Miss Pinkerton on a train and dismisses her claims that there are a spate of murders in her small town until he finds out that she was killed on her way to Scotland Yard. So she's basically going there to report it, and on the train he had sort of dismissed her as being a bit crazy. He heads to the small town of Witchwood, which is a great name for a town or a small town, a place that has a history of witchcraft and strange goings-on to investigate. Battle only makes a slight entry into the story, and it's maybe a little bit cheesy in places, but it has a dark, witchy, spooky vibe that I really like, and I think it lends itself so well to a mystery novel, so I really like this one. Towards Zero in 1944. This time Christie looks at the build-up to a murder as opposed to opening on the murder, like a lot of mystery novels, will open with a murder. So we know that someone is going to be killed. When a man heads to the home he grew up in with his wife, He didn't grow up with his wife, presumably, knowing that his ex-wife will also be there. Very intriguing. I like the way it leaves you guessing sort of who and why, though I think having a murder early on is maybe a more satisfying format. But I love that Agatha Christie was playing with, she didn't really have a formula that she stuck to. And I think this book is a good example of that. I'm not sticking to a formula. So then we move into the standalone novels where, there's not really unifying characters. So there's quite a few of these. The Man in the Brown Suit in 1924. Anne Bedingfield moves to London after the death of her father. Hoping for adventure, she gets more than she bargained for when she sees a man killed at a train station and picks up a mysterious clue on a piece of paper. The plot involves diamonds, South Africa, and the Colonel, a criminal mastermind, and the man of the book's title, The Man in the Brown Suit. A thriller more than a mystery. This is dramatic and has plenty of action, but as I've said before, I don't enjoy these as much as straight mysteries for some reason. Sittaford Mystery in 1931. This is a favorite of mine. In a tiny town, it's winter, a seance is proposed. But when the spirits tell Major Burnaby that his best friend is murdered, he rushes to find out if it's true. It is, but who did it? Young Emily Trefusis gets on the job to solve the case to exonerate her fiancé. This has sort of a little bit of a Hound of the Baskervilles vibe. I really liked the spooky, wintry setting, and the lead is a bright, fun character, so this is one that works really well. Why Didn't They Ask Evans in 1934? Also sometimes titled The Boomerang Clue. This book is one of Christie's thriller-style mysteries and borrows a little from Tommy and Tuppence in some respects. On the golf course, a man whispers the words of the title before dying. It seems like an accident, but Bobby and his aristocratic lady friend, Frankie, are soon embroiled on the trail of murder. I found this book slightly frustrating because the leads don't ask the obvious questions or make the obvious connections, but they are a sweet duo. And Then There Were None, 1939. This is a famous Christie classic. 10 people are invited to an island, each of whom has a crime in their past that they got away with. Once the boat leaves, they realize something is very wrong, and one by one, they start to be killed off. The ending has a really cheeky and unlikely twist, but one that works really well with the tone of the book. This is the world's most sold mystery novel. And while the original title was based on a rhyme, it has changed due to a racial slur. If you know, you know on that one. Death Comes at the End, 1944. This one's one of my favorites too. An unusual theme for Christie, and in fact the first historical whodunit. This book is set in ancient Egypt, a subject that the author knew about due to her husband's work as an archaeologist, as we've previously talked about. It's the story of the household of Imhotep, a mortuary priest who foolishly brings home a concubine who starts to turn everyone against each other and upsets the delicate balance of the home. Then she's found dead, and her spirit seems to reach from the grave to complete her revenge. This one's highly enjoyable, full of interesting historical details and twists and turns. It just feels like something a bit unusual. Sparkling Cyanide. God, that's such a good title for a book. 1945. Also called Remembered Death. This book goes into different characters and looks at their memories of Rosemary, a young wife who died by apparent suicide at her birthday party, where cyanide was put in her wine. One of the people at the table that night had to have done it, but who? Actually a reworking of a Christie short story, but no less effective because of that. Crooked House, 1949. This is one of my favorites too. A man falls in love in Cairo, but when they're reunited, her grandfather is murdered. He and his crooked family all live in a crooked house together, but who did it and why? I think this is based on a nursery rhyme, the title, or the sort of theming. Yeah, this is one where I guessed the killer, which I usually don't. But I just love the sinister nature of the whole book and why the murder was done. This one's it's dark and I really like it. 1951, They Came to Baghdad. Victoria Jones meets Edward right after getting fired and on an impulse follows him to Baghdad, where she gets mixed up in a plot involving a secret summit meeting. A pleasant read featuring places and types that Christie met when on location with her archaeologist husband. Thriller rather than a mystery. It's not bad. Destination unknown, 54. Having been left by the husband she loved and lost a young child to illness, Hilary flees to Morocco. In despair, she plans to kill herself, but is stopped by a British agent to undertake a dangerous mission instead, impersonating the wife of a missing scientist who may have defected to the Soviets. One of the few novels to never have been adapted, it is a lot more entertaining than some of Christie's earlier adventure thriller novels. Hilary's running away and her loss are reminiscent of events in Christie's own life. Ordeal by Innocence, 1958. This is one of the ones I like. 2 years after a man is convicted of the murder of his mother and dies in prison, a witness comes forward who could have exonerated him. As the case is reopened, the family members all look at each other. Which one of them did it? The book focuses on the idea that often the innocent suffer the most when a crime goes unsolved. It was Christie's favorite of all the books that she wrote and has a more serious tone than some of her other books. The Pale Horse, 1961. This is a favorite of mine. This one has a really different feel than a lot of other Agatha Christie novels. It's got themes of sort of witchcraft, mind control, and then organized crime. It opens with a priest murdered to cover up some kind of conspiracy, and it takes us through some local witches and a series of murders that appear to have been done via some occult means. It's a bit darker and a bit more sort of swinging 60s than her other books, but it still has that Christie charm, so it's kind of cool. Endless Night in 67. This is another favorite of mine. This is another of Agatha Christie's favorites as well of her own work. Michael and Ellie meet cute at Gypsy's Acre, where they fall in love and decide to elope. It turns out that Ellie is insanely wealthy and they're able to buy the land where they met and have a house built by the sinister architect Santonics. That sounds like one of those, like a band or like a... Anyway, but the land is cursed. Christie leaves too many clues for you to not see the end coming, but the spooky tone and the themes are all really fun, so it's a good ride. This one is a real delight. Passenger to Frankfurt in 1970. When a fun-loving aristocrat gives his passport and coat to a woman so she can enter the country under his identity, he thinks the spy game sounds like fun. But the rising youth revolution hides a dangerous game of armaments, drugs, and a rising Nazi youth movement that threatens the world. No, really, that's what it's about. This 1970, this is one weird Agatha Christie novel. And for that reason, just so much is thrown at the wall here. It's kind of entertaining, honestly. But I don't love her spy novels as much as her mysteries. So this one's a bit of a strange one. So then we have short story collections. So this can get a little bit confusing. As a guide to which short story books to seek out, many of the compilations that I'm going to talk about have a mix of previously printed stories, meaning that you come across them more than once. So you might find in a compilation that you get something from a Poirot compilation and something from a Marple compilation and that kind of thing. As far as I can tell, all Poirot and Marple stories can be found in the compilations that are like their compilations, or you can also find, complete short story volumes of those characters. So I'm going to try and be clear about what's in each volume so that you can see where a story appears. But yeah, like a tip for you, if you're a bit of a completionist, if you get the compilations, The Golden Ball, Witness for the Prosecution, and While the Light Lasts, you'll have a fairly complete gathering of Christie's short stories, other than the ones that feature her famous detectives. So if you got like a complete Marple, complete Poirot, and then these, you would kind of have her short stories covered. So the first one I want to talk about is from 1930. It's The Mysterious Mr. Quinn. I really like these. These are sort of a little bit different. Christie loved the character of Satterthwaite, the social butterfly, and the mysterious Mr. Quinn, who is a kind of, in theming, like a Harlequin-inspired character. Satterthwaite solves problems and mysteries at the prompting of this guy called Harley Quinn, whose nature is never revealed. Is he magical? Is he a kind of psychopomp? Any way you look at him, he's the catalyst in each story. So these are lovely stories, and some people have said they're more like sort of modern fairy tales than detective stories. So these are well worth a read as something a little bit different from Christie. 1933, The Hound of Death. This is a volume of Christie's supernatural, spooky stories or stories about fate kind of thing rather than detective-style mysteries. I feel that while these creepy stories aren't her strong suit, they are always interesting and often have kind of an interesting premise or ideas in them. And of course, The Witness is a famous Christie classic. So this contains Hound of Death, Red Signal, Fourth Man, The Gypsy, Lamp, Wireless, Witness for the Prosecution, Mystery of the Blue Jar, Strange Case of Arthur Carmichael, Call of Wings, Last Seance, and SOS. And then we have The Listerdale Mystery in 34. This is a collection of lighter, relatively cheerful stories. Philomel Cottage is included here, and that's been very popular and adapted a few times. So this has The Listerdale Mystery, Philomel Cottage, Girl on the Train, Sing a Song of Sixpence, The Manhood of Edward Robinson. That sounds like something else, kind of a novel. Accident, Jane in Search of a Job, Fruitful Sunday, Mr. Eastwood's Adventure, Golden Ball, Raja's Emerald, and Swan Song. Then we have 1934's Parker Pym Investigates. Parker Pym worked in a statistics department for the government, and so it's given him this understanding of people. In these stories, he works to solve people's problems and make them happy with his knowledge of statistics to kind of almost give him like a magical insight into life. So the plot functions like a light-hearted detective story, initially solving problems and later solving some crimes. His use of his understanding of human nature makes him a lot like Marple or Poirot in a lot of ways. And in fact, you will meet Miss Lemon and Ariadne Oliver in these stories. So this is something a bit unusual if you're looking for something by Agatha Christie you haven't read before. This volume has a total of 12 of the 14 Parker Pym stories. They can be a little bit silly and a bit sort of Boys' Own Adventure-esque, but they're really fun in an old-fashioned kind of a way. Then we have The Regatta and Other Stories from 1939. Almost all these stories feature a detective, Poirot, Marple, or Parker Pym. So we have Regatta Mystery, Mystery of the Baghdad Chest, How Does Your Garden Grow, Problem at Palenza Bay, Yellow Iris, Miss Marple Tells a Story, The Dream, In a Glass Darkly, Problem at Sea. Then we have Witness for the Prosecution and Other Stories in 1948. This is an interesting mix. This was published only in the US, as the stories had all appeared elsewhere in the UK. The book has one Poirot story and includes some other fiction as well, from supernatural themes to crime. Three Blind Mice and Other Stories in 1950. Title story is very entertaining and was adapted into the famous play Mousetrap, while other included stories appear elsewhere as well. A young couple turn an large old house into a guest house, but snowstorm moves in and there's a murder on the loose. It's a bright, funny, and melodramatic story, and as you read it, you can see why it made such a good play. So that's a little bit about Mousetrap for you. There's other stories included there. The Underdog and Other Stories in 51. These are all Poirot stories, and the title story, The Underdog, is longer than the others. It's a mix of stories from different eras of Poirot's career, and some of these appear elsewhere, but I really like a Poirot short story. Amusingly, my old beaten up paperback copy, which is my favorite for Agatha Christie's to try and find, had an ad for cigarettes printed in it, and I know that's not that unusual, but it just kind of struck me, of being very of its time. Adventure of the Christmas Pudding, 1960. This volume is a fun one to save and read at Christmas, as the title story has a nice, cozy English Christmas theme. It contains a mix of Poirot and Marple, the first of its kind to do so. Though it's not an even split, there's more Poirot than Marple. This is a UK release, but the stories within are all found in various US compendiums. Double Sin and Other Stories in 61. It's a collection of stories all appear elsewhere as well, but it's a nice blend of different detectives and genres, kind of a sampler. Star Over Bethlehem and Other Stories, 65. This is a book of stories and poems with a religious theme. So this is a little hard to find. And personally, I don't think it's Christie's best work, but it is interesting because it shows Christie's more personal, private, religious side. So perhaps one just for more diehard fans. And then we have The Golden Ball and Other Stories in 74. Some of these stories appear in other short story collections, like a lot of these, but what's interesting about this book is that there's not a murder to be found. This one is full of stories about stolen jewels or strange people, and the latter half has quite a few ghosts or supernatural themes, and they're all really good stories, so this is a good one. Problem at Palenza Bay and Other Stories in 1991. So this one is a compilation containing 2 Poirot, 2 Parker Pym, 2 Harley Quinn, and 2 spooky tales. So this one's a nice way to read some more well-known and some lesser-known Christie fare, basically. And then we have in 97, the Harlequin tea set, or While the Light Lasts and Other Stories. So these are actually 2 different volumes, but they're virtually the same and contain various stories originally published in magazines. Mix of crime, fiction, and supernatural. And then 13 for Luck in 61. This one's like an Agatha Christie primer. So if you've never read any Agatha Christie, you might actually want to pick this one up as your first one. It opens with a quick intro to the author and her works, and then contains 13 short stories in 5 sections, one for each of her famous detectives, from Poirot to Inspector Battle, I think. Each detective gets their own little introduction and a little history at the start of each section. So it's pretty neat. It's a nice book for your collection, and it's a great place to start for the uninitiated, or if you wanted to sort of give someone something to be like, you might like Agatha Christie, here's a sampler, you know? So then we move on to Agatha Christie's romance novels. So she wrote under a pseudonym, Mary Westmacott, and she wrote, I think there's 6 of these romance stories. So writing under a pseudonym allowed her to kind of try out fiction writing that wasn't part of, the genre that she was known for, and kind of, just kind of play around with that. They are romances, but they're not what we would call, they're more like drama stories sort of thing, what we would call like a drama these days, kind of. So in 1930, we got Giant's Bread. Giants in fairy stories grind up men's bones to make their bread. So that's where the title comes from. So the giant in the story is life, and the book is the life of a musical genius and his 2 childhood friends, his free-spirited cousin, and his outsider neighbor. It's full of drama and humor. There's a real talent for dramatic writing here. But the characters are a little bit overwritten, and so they can be a little irritating and hard to like sometimes. So this isn't Agatha Christie's best story. Unfinished Portrait in 1934. I mentioned this one up the top, so some of you may be interested in seeking this one out. A man stops a woman from committing suicide, and in listening to her life story, manages to help her heal or find healing. Celia is painfully shy and retiring in personality and is devastated by her divorce. This book shares a lot with Christie's biography. The husband is diabolical, and on the whole, it's a good read. So I think that's one you may want to seek out. Absent in the Spring in 1944. I really like this book. While waiting for a connecting train, a middle-aged woman is forced to reflect on her life. She is someone who feels she knows best and has done well, but we start to see that she isn't the selfless, caring person she sees herself as, and that she refuses to see certain ugly things about her own life. So this is a really thought-provoking character study, and it's just a well-written book. The Rose and the Yew Tree in 48. A love triangle. In this one, a crippled man is drawn into the drama of a local election while recovering in a country home. While he falls for a younger girl, she falls for the charismatic man running for office. Full of amusing descriptions of characters and plenty of emotion, this book shows Christie's ability to understand people and their psychology and also lampoon social niceties. But its long paragraphs about politics can be a little slow and dull, and the romantic relationship feels a little bit dated. A Daughter's a Daughter, 1952. A widow plans to remarry, but her jealous daughter ruins any chance of the relationship succeeding. This will change the course of both of their lives. So, originally a play in the 1930s, the action sometimes feels a little stilted as a result. It's a bit socially dated and sometimes a bit dark. Not a great novel, but might be interesting if you just want to read everything Agatha Christie ever wrote, kind of thing. And then 1956, we have The Burden. Is it better to love or be loved? A little girl hates her sister until she saves her from a fire, but her intense love for her becomes a burden to her sibling. Roughly, this book explores 3 interlinked characters in 3 sections who love deeply. Whether that kind of love is a burden to the receiver is kind of the exploration. Interesting kind of thing to explore. This one's a little bit dull, in my opinion. And then, of course, there are plays. So obviously, Agatha Christie, I talked about The Mousetrap above. That one was adapted from the short story Three Blind Mice. So I talked about that above. Witness for the Prosecution, adapted from the short story again. So those, I think they've actually both been made into movies. So then from there, Charles Osborne wrote novelizations of Black Coffee, which was so successful he was then tasked with Spider's Web and The Unexpected Guest as well. So these are like stories made into a play, and then he novelized the play. So Black Coffee, novelized version of the play by Charles Osborne. Poirot is tasked with solving the crime of who put poison in the coffee of physicist Sir Amory, who has just invented a formula for a new type of explosive. Then we have Spider's Web, written at the request of Margaret Lockwood, the actress. This book involves the wife of a diplomat finding a body in her home and tasking her 3 house guests with helping her hide it to avoid an incident with a foreign politician while she tries to solve the mystery. So that one's quite funny. Unexpected Guest. A man has car trouble in the middle of nowhere and finds an isolated house where he plans to ask for help, but instead stumbles on a woman who appears to have just murdered her wheelchair-bound husband. And then he offers to help her cover up the killing. So those are 3 that were, you might find those in your travels. So then we have 2 books of nonfiction. We have Come Tell Me How You Live, which came out in 1946. So Christie's second husband, Max Mallowan, the archaeologist, it's about him and his work and her time spent with him on digs. And sort of, you can see how that influenced some of her books as you read this book. They go to ancient places. So this one is a memoir of a trip, a specific trip she took with him to kind of show what it was really like to go on these digs, because I think people around her had a bit of a romantic idea. And so this is kind of a travelogue. They're often very funny. And I think it's really worth reading because it's a side of her and her life that you don't see in her other books, So I really like this one. Personally, I think for modern readers, because we're so, we have so many photographs and videos and things of places, so they're not so remote as they were in this time. The travelogue kind of can be very dry as a read for modern readers. So, yeah. Oh, and also, obviously it was written, what did I say, in the 40s. So, you'd have to kind of be aware that her opinions were formed in that time. So they wouldn't be like today's understanding of things. And then we have the autobiography from 1977. If you like Agatha Christie, you have to read this book. It is so good. This is one of these books that I think about. Like, I will be doing the dishes or something and I will think about something from this book. I actually enjoyed this book so much that I was a little sad when I finished it. So Agatha Christie comes across kind of like an old friend when you're reading this. She's very, very human. She's very normal, relatable. So yeah, it's her autobiography. So it tells you the story of her life and the times that she lived through. Sometimes she's funny. Sometimes she's sort of talks about dramatic events and stuff. Sometimes that it's quite tragic to read, but it's always warm and human. It's interesting to see her thoughts and feelings on life as well, relationships and things like that. Even when they're sometimes outdated by modern standards, which you would expect, it's still relatable. She's a very nice person. She was a very nice person, very private, very shy. Yeah, I mean, this book feels as close as you're going to get to the real person. And I just think it's a really good autobiography. Yeah, it's not that she tells you everything about her life. Like, there are things she's obviously chosen not to talk about. But you can really feel who she is in her writing. And I think that's really cool. So this one's highly recommended. And then last of all here, I just wanted to mention the Detection Club. So the Detection Club, I've mentioned before on this channel, it was formed in 1930 by the creme de la creme of British mystery writers, including Agatha Christie. And Dorothy Sayers, Ronald Knox, Hugh Walpole, Anthony Berkeley, all of those people. It's still going today. And during Agatha Christie's time, there were a few books that were produced by the Detection Club that just, if you're a fan and you want to read everything of hers, you might want to grab these. So the first one is The Floating Admiral in 1931. Yeah, 1931. Is this a fun book? It's a mystery, and each chapter is written by a different writer who is a member of the Detection Club. So if you like mysteries of this era, you're going to find some of your favorite writers here, and Agatha Christie wrote one of the chapters. If you were just looking for a straight-up mystery, you might have problems with this one because obviously different writer for each chapter, but it does work, I guess, as a whole. And then Six Against the Yard in 1936. This was reprinted in 2014, and in the reprint of this, an essay by Christie was commissioned by a newspaper, which is included. So obviously she wasn't alive in 2014, but they included this this essay that she wrote for a newspaper. So the cool thing is this essay was not widely seen in the UK before this. And it's a pretty good essay. So yeah, this is a pretty fun book on the whole. So there you have it. I read literally everything Agatha Christie ever wrote that I could get my hands on, other than her private correspondence, I guess. Yeah, so if you are a Christie fan, I'm guessing, because everyone's a little bit different, maybe some of you guys love the spy novels. Maybe you haven't heard of Harley Quinn or Parker Pym. Maybe you like the David Suchet Poirot show. Maybe you like some of the older stuff. I would really love to hear, do you kind of agree with the ones that are my favorites? Or are they the ones that you hate? I just want to know what your favorite ones are. And if you've read any of her like romance novels, I would love to know what you thought of those, because I found those quite interesting. And yeah, let me know what your favorite ones are, because that would just be really interesting to me. And if you have any little facts that you would like to, Agatha Christie facts you want to bring up, please do in the comments, because it's always interesting. Sometimes people come up with things that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And we all learn something. So I will chat to you guys more in the comments. And thank you for joining me on this nice long journey where I talk about every single thing that Agatha Christie wrote. Take care, you guys. You can check out some of my other videos. I also have another channel and socials, so you can find links below if you want more of that. And if you want to hang out again, remember to like and subscribe. And you can always leave a comment. Let me know what you thought, or let me know what else you might want to see. Thank you.